Hey, everybody.
Welcome to today's segment, which is on subsidiary motions within Robert's Rules of Order. I'm Larry Taylor,
And
and I'm
I'm
with
John Ellis.
today's segment is about more ways to prevent getting run over in meetings. This is one of a series of videos that we're making on Robert's Rules of Order. Um, so what we will do today is I'll first talk about some organizational information in case you want to study this stuff in more depth. Then I'll talk about motions in general to frame the topic of subsidiary motions. And then we'll talk about subsidiary motions themselves. And if you've been to any of these meetings, you're familiar with subsidiary motions. You just didn't know what they were called. So organizationally, this is produced within the Cascadia E-Unit, which is organized within the National Association of Parliamentarians. We're pending at this point, awaiting approval of our bylaws, but that's where we will be very soon. And it's also associated with the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians. And the intention of this group is to provide a way to study parliamentary procedure in Oregon outside of the Portland metro area. And even though we're sort of Oregon centric, we're really not. So if you're from Montana or Idaho or the hinterlands of Washington or Northern California, you're more than welcome to join us. You can probably find resources in your own state, though, if you look hard enough. If we would love for you to join the group, to become a member, you just need to pass a quiz to qualify, showing high-level knowledge of parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order. Before you pass that, you can always be a provisional member, which is what most people do until they have enough knowledge to pass the exam. We do have scholarships that are available. This is on the next slide. There's a nominal fee to join the group. The fees to join the National Association of Parliamentarians is a bit higher, but the Oregon president has committed to helping people with scholarships if they need it. And to take the exam, any member of the National Association of Parliamentarians can help you. You can sign up to join the group at pdpo.org, or you can send a message to me, Larry, at hubbuildmedia.org, and it'll get to me and I will help you out. There, we have three reference documents that you should be familiar with if you are interested in these topics. The main one, of course, is Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. It's in its 11th edition, going into its 12th edition come September 8th. And I understand the 12th edition will be on Kindle, so you can actually have an electronic version of this. For those of you who would like something much more digestible and allegedly contains all the information you need to pass the qualification exam, you can get Robert's Rules of Order in newly revised in brief. Both the Robert's Rules of Order and the in brief document can be purchased on Amazon or hopefully at your local bookstore if you have one. To study for the registration exams to become a registered parliamentarian takes a bit more assistance, and you can get from the National Association of Parliamentarians website a book entitled Study Guide, which gives you all of the questions which you will take a subset of to actually pass the exam. First, we will go through an overview of motions, and what a motion is how items are handled when brought before the assembly. This is the basic mechanism for bringing things in front of a deliberative assembly. Let's go to the slide called Classes of Motions.
I will in just a minute. I want to say to everybody, hello out there. Hi, Real Jingy and Jay Pearson and Oz and Bill. Thank you for joining us. I will be here to take your questions. So I'm looking in the YouTube chat. If you have any questions after Larry goes through a particular section, just type it in the chat and we'll get it answered. And like Larry said, this is for everybody. So this is not limited to Oregon. If you have any questions about how this works, let us know. Thank you. Carry on, Larry.
So this is where people's heads start to explode when they get hit with this stuff. But the motions are classified for a reason. It's to more easily remember how they're handled. the motion that most people are familiar with is the main motion, which is things like, I move that the Clatsop County Democrats have a fair at the county fair this year, have a booth at the county fair this year, and that we don't spend more than $500. And that's a motion that's brought before the assembly. There's a number of things that can happen to the motion, and those are what we are talking about today, and this is why they are called subsidiary motions. So under main motions, you have the original main motion, which is what I just gave an example of. You have incidental main motions. Then you have subsidiary motions, which are about the handling of the motion. There's privileged motions, which are things like, I would like to open the window so we can cool down the room. And then there are incidental motions. And then the final class are motions that bring a question again before the assembly, which is kind of a special class. The thing that you need to remember about motions when you make them is some specific characteristics of them. So is it in order when another has the floor? So there are motions where you do not have to be recognized to make. You can actually interrupt someone. But in general, you need to be recognized to make the motion. Is a second required? Usually 2 people in the assembly have to want to talk about something in order to bring it before the floor, but there are some motions where a second is not required. And so it's good to know those, because one of the ways that Robert's rules is used against us is they bring in technicalities which you don't necessarily know the details of, and so you have no basis in which to argue. Is the motion debatable? So there are motions that you can make that are not debatable. If they start debating them, you can say, point of order, this is not debatable. It's amazing what people try to do. And usually in these meetings, you find people who like to debate. But if it's not debatable, you can't debate. You say, point of order, this is not debatable. Is the motion amendable? So the main motion that I gave an example of, the Clatsop County Democrats want to have a fair booth at the county fair, is amendable. The original motion was for $500, but someone might say, I move to amend the motion to replace $500 with $250 because we can't afford it. What votes can be required for adoption, and then can the motion be reconsidered? So those are all good things to know about the different types of motions that can be made. So going to the next slide, specifically what we're talking about today are subsidiary motions. And these are the tools for handling motions that are brought before the assembly. The definition of this, which is on the next slide. So subsidiary motions assist the assembly in treating or disposing of a main motion. And as I said earlier, these are motions that you commonly hear used in meetings. There's a couple that people generally know, and they are forever dragging them out and throwing them on the floor in front of everyone. The next slide are the 7 subsidiary motions in their order of precedence. So these have an order, and the precedence means when they can be brought before the assembly. So if you have a motion to postpone indefinitely, you can do postpone to a certain time or previous limit. The highest ranking one is lay on the table. The order of these is important to remember, but usually people have a reference card in front of them so that they don't have to rely upon their memory to get it right. So we'll go through these 7 subsidiary motions in detail next.
Hey, Larry.
Yes.
So you just said usually people have a reference card in front of them to deal with the order of these subsidiary motions?
Yes.
So that sounds like something we should add to that app, don't you think?
Yes.
Awesome. Just checking.
I was just thinking, well, why don't I put it on a document so I can bring it up on my tablet so I don't have to carry around and lose the cards like I've lost all the previous ones I owned. Because the internet is always there as long as we have electricity.
Absolutely. Brilliant. All right. Carry on.
So the lowest ranking of the subsidiary motions is to postpone indefinitely. And this is often confused with lay on the table. Postpone indefinitely is if an embarrassing main motion has been brought before the assembly, a member can propose to dispose of this question without bringing it to a direct vote by moving to postpone indefinitely. So if a member proposes to bring a Confederate flag, moves to bring a Confederate flag to the next meeting, and that the pledge be said to it along with the American flag, you can move to postpone indefinitely the consideration of this and bury it. This is what this one is for.
That's good to know.
The next highest motion is one which you see commonly used, and this is the motion to amend. People never like things when they're first brought out, it seems. If you shop something around and get agreement beforehand, sometimes you can get away without something being amended. But if a main motion might be more suitable or acceptable in an altered form, a proposal to change its wording, either to clarify or within a minute's limits modify its meaning before the main motion is voted upon, you can introduce those changes by a motion to amend. So just like I said earlier, the original motion was for to spend $500. The secondary motion was made to amend it to $250. The next ranking motion on the next slide is to commit or refer to a committee. There are people who love doing this because they think it's another way of burying motions brought before the assembly. Usually there are standing committees that are set up to deal with this sort of thing in any organized society. So when it may be that more time is required to study a motion properly, or that additional information is needed, you can move to commit the motion to another committee, like a rules committee, or if it's more in the form of a resolution, to the resolutions committee, or perhaps if it's regarding the state fair booth, it's the state fair booth committee. But it's a way of taking business out of the main meeting and moving it into a committee so that further work can be done and you're not wasting everyone's time struggling over things that are missing. After the committee has completed their work, then they bring the motion back to the floor, and then it's considered when it has been worked on. That's why it's not really a good way of burying things. If you want to truly bury it, you postpone indefinitely. If you want to postpone consideration, you do something else. If you want the motion studied more with a recommendation, then you refer it to a committee.
Or you do what we were talking about in the earlier show, and you ignore the fact that a committee is supposed to do it, and you just do it yourself, right?
Yeah, you hope no one notices, and they let you get away with it.
Yeah. So many rules to break.
The next one is postpone to a certain time. Next slide, please. So if an assembly might prefer to consider a main motion later in the same meeting or in another meeting, this can be proposed by moving to postpone. If you remember the order of business in a meeting that starts out with the approval of the agenda, and you might have an agenda item called, and it's under new business, and someone is proposing a fair booth for the county fair, but for some reason the presenter is being delayed, and you do have other items to consider. Someone can say, I move that we postpone consideration of the fair booth until the last item on the agenda, or something to that effect. And if the majority agrees to that, then you can do that. Thank you. I actually did check for errors beforehand, but I always leave one in to make sure people are watching.
Very nice. Very nice. Fair enough.
The next one is limit or extend limits of debate. So we've talked previously about how you can have a special rule where you alter the fundamental debate rules of no more than 2 times for 10 minutes each. on motions to be something else. You can have an overarching special rule that changes it to something like speaking no more than 3 times for 2 minutes. But if you want to do this within an actual meeting, so if your default is the Robert's Rule standard of no more than 2 times for 10 minutes, you can move to limit debate to no more than 3 times for 2 minutes inside of a meeting on a motion. And so this is how you do that. If you are really tired of people taking all 10 minutes twice to talk about their arguments, then this is what you do. One of the things about motions that never think that you're the only person that is feeling this way. Typically, when things are devolving and debate gets isolated and very few people are participating, there's more people that feel the same way as you do if you're not actively engaged. So this is how you limit debate.
And this is a subsidiary, by understanding things. The reason this is subsidiary in a motion is because it's a motion on a motion.
Yes.
And you can't move while you're in the middle of, you can't do that. So all right, I'm understanding here. It's cool.
And there's another point rattling around in the background where there's a fundamental principle of parliamentary procedure that you can't consider more than one motion at a time, but it's no more than one primary motion at a time. So I can't move to have a booth at the state fair and then someone say, oh, I move that we have a booth at the World's Fair coming up. That's not in order until you've dispositioned the first motion. These are called secondary motions because you can apply them to the main motion,
right,
and have them going on simultaneously. You still consider them in the order that they have been introduced on the floor. So if you have a main motion and you move to refer it to a committee, you have to disposition moving it to a committee, either yes or no, before you can take further action.
All right, but this is how you can basically say, I don't really care about talking about Larry's motion. I want to talk about this motion, so let's postpone his and take a vote on it, basically.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
The next one is previous question, and this is one that you hear both used and abused a lot in meetings. If it's desired to close debate and amendment of a pending motion so that it will come to an immediate vote, this can be proposed by moving the previous question. This is the case where people forget that there's a limit on debate. So if you are not a connoisseur of the finer details of Robert's Rules of Order, maybe your group doesn't understand that they can only debate twice on a motion, and they've been going back and forth for 20 minutes, and 30 people in the room are watching 2 people argue. You can end it by saying, I move the previous question. Because this is limiting everyone's right to debate eternally, it does require a 2/3 vote, but you can do that. And that's why you see people call the question. The reason why this is abused is people don't get recognized to call it. So you have to raise your hand and the chair has to recognize you, and you say, that's when you can say, I move the previous question. It also does not end debate by you saying those words. It's not a magic incantation. It's saying, excuse me, I propose that we end debate. That's what it's really saying, and you vote on it. So if I say, I move the previous question, then what the chair should do is say, all those in favor of ending debate, please say aye, and all those opposed say no. And if 2/3 or more of the people in the room decide to end debate, then debate is over, and you then take a vote on the pending issue.
Fair enough.
It doesn't end when you say the words, I call the previous question.
No, but it lets you stop the endless back and forth that you're tired of, right?
Yes. And the other way, of course, is to remember whatever your debate rules are. The foundational one is that no one gets to speak more than twice.
Right.
Which is abused, or whatever default special order that your group has.
So in that case, let's say you're going back and forth and the chair hasn't said, okay, you've spoken twice, the chair's just letting it go. How would you address that? I mean, do you just I move previous question, or do you say, yo, you're not enforcing the a rule? Is that point of order at that point?
You say yo, which is in colonial English, point of order.
Thank you. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Point of order. I believe the gentle person from precinct 32 has now spoken 5 times, and the limit is 2.
Okay.
And the chair should then wake up and say, "Oh, that's right. We do have limits on debate."
Great. Thank you. All right. If only the buttons that they show in the state capitals where they vote for each other with their little buttons, it should be a little shock buzzer. Wake them up.
Yes. If a majority wishes to wake up the chair, then that should.
That's cool. That's good to know, though. I mean, because this is really important. How do we stop? Because I've heard it. You've heard it before, where people are just going back and forth, and everybody else in the room is like, "This is how you make that happen." There's these rules for a reason. I appreciate that, Larry.
And this is one of the reasons why people hate meetings, because they go to these meetings and they end up devolving into 2 people going back and forth, but you don't have to endure that, and especially if a strong majority doesn't want to endure it.
Right. I mean, something else that you said earlier to me that's so important. My dad goes to a meeting of the elders in his town, and they just talk about stuff, current events and stuff. They used to follow Robert's rules. They got sick of it because the rules said that you had to read the agenda or do the agenda or the minutes at the beginning. Nobody wanted to do that. And listening to you earlier said, well, if you want to change that, you just say we don't want to go in that order. We can change the order, but it has to be something we take a vote on. And I don't think my dad or anybody in the group knows that, right? So they could have still maintained order within their meetings, but rearranged it so that they didn't have to do what none of them like to do in the first place.
Yes, you say, I move to dispense with the reading of the minutes.
Right.
And then if the majority agrees, then you dispense with the reading of the minutes.
Right, that's it.
This stuff's been evolved for hundreds of years, so most conditions can be accommodated for.
Yeah. So anyway, thought that was cool. Thank you.
And the final subsidiary motion is lay on the table. So if there is a reason for the assembly to lay the main motion aside temporarily without setting a time for resuming its consideration, but with the provision that it can be taken up again whenever a majority so decides, this can be proposed by the motion to lay on the table. So I've moved that the county fair booth be established this year for $500. Someone else can say, I move the motion be laid on the table, and if a majority decides to do so, they can do that. At a future meeting, someone can say, I move that we take the motion to have a county fair booth from the table, and then that's when the topic is resumed discussion on.
Interesting. Still another way to
not the same as to postpone indefinitely, which means bury it.
Right. Just a statement here from Dave H. Thank you for joining us, Dave H. It says this one is abused a lot. They cry out question and try to make that end discussion then and there. It's a favorite tactic of natural bullies, Dave H. says. So there's some slang that I'm hearing, because you also said like I call the question. So there's like shortcuts that we have to learn.
Yes, and people don't speak in full sentences anymore. So often they shout out question, and first of all they have to be recognized. They have to go, and then they can say question, and everyone understands what question means in general if they're familiar with the protocol. So yeah, question is the abbreviated form of I call the question.
All right.
And the question is, how do you vote on this issue? It was confusing to me for a long time. It's like, well, what the hell is a question? The question is, shall we establish a booth at the Clatsop County Fair for $500? Right. That's the question. And then the answer is either yes or no.
Right. Call the question. That makes sense. So yo really wasn't far off. It could have been used in colonial times. You don't know.
There's probably people that use yo now.
See? Telling you. All right. What's next?
So the characteristics of subsidiary emotions. They can all be applied to another motion that's pending. So if you think back on what we just talked about, I want to amend something, I want to lay it on the table, I want to postpone indefinitely. They're all applicable to the main motion. They can be applied to any main motion. They fit into an order of precedence. So the order in which I just went through them was with the lowest ranking going to the highest ranking. They are out of order when another has the floor, and they're in order during the entire time the motion is pending. The motion being whatever's on the floor, like having a county fair booth. The next slide is a summary of the characteristics, and this is what would be really good to have on my tablet. In fact, I could just probably bring this slide over. So if you remember when I initially talked about the characteristics of motions, the things you need to remember is can it be seconded? Is it debatable? Is it amendable? And what is the vote required for it to pass? So lay on the table needs a second. So two people have to want to lay on the table before you can even have that done. And for God's sakes, if you don't believe in it, don't just play along. Don't extend debates. Don't second a motion if you really don't want to discuss it, because really two people have to want to do something in order for it to be turned into action. So all of the motions that we talk about today need seconded. The first three, the three highest rating ones, are not debatable. So if I say I move to put the motion to establish a fair booth at the Clatsop County Fair on the table, someone else cannot raise their hand and say, well, I don't think it should be put on the table because we really need the publicity and we need the visibility in the public, blah, blah, blah. That's debating it. And if they start debating it, then you say, point of order, the motion's not debatable. And the chair should shut down the debate, especially if it's been brought to their attention. Is it amendable? So it doesn't make sense to amend lay on the table because there's really only one thing you can do. And it doesn't make sense to amend previous question because there's really only one thing you can do. You can cut off debate. It's not, I want to cut off debate in 5 more minutes after 6 more people speak. It's, I want to cut off debate. And postpone debate indefinitely is not amendable. So either you postpone it indefinitely or you don't. The vote required, usually you can remember this by some simple rules. So if it's a curtailment of a fundamental principle of parliamentary procedure, like your ability to vote or speak in a meeting, it requires a 2/3 vote. Otherwise, it tends to be a majority vote. So it only requires a majority to lay it on the table. You only need 50% plus 1 to lay it on the table. Previous question, which is a limitation on people's ability to debate, requires a 2/3 vote. Limit and extend debate also is a modification of your fundamental rights, so it also requires 2/3. Postpone has some nuances, and if you want to know about the nuances, in general it's a majority, but sometimes it can be a 2/3 and you need to read about it. Commit, refer, so if you want to commit it to a committee, it only requires a majority vote. Amend varies, but usually amendments to motions are a majority, and postpone indefinitely is a majority. So if you want to bury something forever, it just takes a majority in the room to do so. The last set of slides are examples of how you utter the words to affect these things. So this is your magic spell book. The first one is to lay on the table. All you do is say, I move the motion be laid on the table. And then someone has to second it, and then you vote on it, and it's either laid on the table or not. The next slide is an example of previous question. So the full form of the motion is, I move the previous question, or you can also say, I call the question, or simply question. Then the procedure is the chair will say, the question has been called. All those in favor of ending debate, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote no. And then if 2/3 agree to ending debate, then debate is ended, and then you go to the question. I saw that.
Sorry, it's just
Limit debate. So this is something that I've not seen used, but you should remember that it's available to you if things are dragging out and getting out of hand. Because 10 minutes is a long time to be speaking if you don't have any other rule about how long people can speak. So to do this, you raise your hand and say, I move that debate be limited to one speech of 3 minutes for each member, or I move that during this meeting, debate be limited to 5 minutes for each member. And that cuts down on the people doing the back and forth. Really, debate is, you should have all of your ideas thought through and that you can speak them. Having a second opportunity is an opportunity to give information that you didn't think of the first time, but it is not an endless ticket to talk.
I really think getting more people to understand the fundamental right to extend or limit debate will help them want to go to meetings.
Yes. Our biggest hurdle is that we're so polite. We don't want to make anyone feel bad or impose something on somebody. But, there are people that do not behave well. And so these are the sort of polite ways of imposing limits on meetings that could make them more bearable.
Well, just sometimes people lose track of the point. And they're well intended, but they just want to go on and on and on and on and on and debate something. You're like, okay, we get it. Now we're going to vote because other things, right? And that was one of the reasons I stopped participating in several meetings. It's like, I don't give a fuck. Please, let's move on. We've debated it into the ground, let's make a decision. And it's good to know that if you know the rules, you can help.
In another meeting, we'll talk about how to bring people back to the topic, because you cannot talk about the state fair if the motion is on a county fair. The discussion has to be germane to the motion on the table.
Makes sense. That happens a lot. Sidetracking.
Oh, yeah. People have no ability to focus on one topic.
All right. What's next?
Next is postpone. So examples of this, I move to postpone the question to the next meeting. All those in favor say aye, and then that you can then move in my example, the question of fair booth to the next meeting, and it comes up under unfinished business. So remember the ranking of business. There's the reports of the chairs and the committees, then there's unfinished business and business. So if you postpone this to the next meeting, then it comes up under unfinished business. Unfinished business is one of those categories that seems to be abused. You can also do things like, I move that the resolution be postponed until 3 p.m. and made a special order. That form of the motion makes more sense if you have like a full day meeting and there's some reason why you need to do that.
All right.
Next slide is on the motion to commit. So you can see these are in fairly clear English. It's not the colonial English that some of these things seem to devolve into. So if someone wants to refer my motion about the county fair booth to the committee, all they need to say is, I move to refer the motion to the rules committee, or whatever committee is most appropriate. There's a second, and then by majority vote, you can do that. Another form of this is, I move that the motion to be referred to a committee of 3 to be appointed by the chair. I made the mistake of not being specific in the creation of a committee a year ago, and I'm still regretting that one. And so in the future, if I ever do this, I will use the third form example. I move to refer the resolution to a committee of 7, the chair to be Mr. Smith, 6 members to be elected by a ballot from open nominations, and the committee to be instructed to report at the April meeting. What this does not allow the members of the committee to be mucked around with. It doesn't open it up to abuse who's chairing the meeting, and it gives a specific date in which to report back. This is a really good form of this motion.
I was just about to ask about this kind of thing, because if we think at the federal level, we have dudes like Lamar Smith, science-based technology chair of a committee, And you see how well that works because the whole committee's corrupt. And so, that like referring to committee, if the committee is going to do the opposite of what you're hoping, then there's no point. So I like being able to say a committee that's not a corrupt committee that you would be referring to. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Next is examples to amend. So these are the variations on what can be done to a motion. I move to amend by adding, and this is how you add text to an existing motion. I move to amend by inserting. There's a distinction between the two, which is about adding it within a motion or to the end of the motion. I move to amend by striking out. So if there was something in the motion that you didn't like and you feel like it would be a better motion if you took something out, you can remove words. And then there's the substitution. I move to substitute for the pending resolution, or you can also substitute specific words within a motion. So if you have a main motion and you don't like how it's presented, these are the ways in which you propose changes to modify the main motion. The amendments need to be seconded and then voted upon. And this sometimes drags out meetings because if they start getting into nuances of words and you have to take votes on all of them and you have to debate all of them, then it does drag out. But just watch your limits on debate, and that can minimize the pain.
Minimize. Well, this, at the convention meeting that we had where Valdez Bravo was chair and he did such a great job, it seems like we did a lot of this stuff, adding, inserting, amending the LAIs and the different platform things. There was a lot of that. It was done in real time, right? Somebody was just changing that stuff on the fly.
Yes. And you saw some things that were a little unconventional, like would you three of you just go off and come to an agreement and bring this back?
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, if everyone agrees to that kind of process, and that kind of process does make sense. You've got three things, the language is similar but not identical. Would the three of you just please consolidate it so we have one thing to consider, so we don't have to deal with the complexity of dealing with three things that are similar but not identical.
It was amazing, though. I mean, to watch it being done in real time. And I was dragged off to a little corner where they were working on incorporating my stuff, the engagement broadcast stuff, into the other things. And, the rules, had they not existed, there would have been chaos, right? So that was a real-time democracy in action. It's the fastest democracy I've ever seen. Anyway, that's cool.
The final one is to postpone indefinitely. And again, this is a very simple motion. You say, I move the resolution regarding the county fair booth be postponed indefinitely. And if a majority think they never want to talk about this again, they vote yes. And if they want to bring it up at the next meeting, then they vote this motion down, and then they move to table or take some other form of secondary motion.
I definitely don't want to talk about the fair again. We've talked about it a lot. Are you going to have a booth, by the way? What ended up happening be the result of that?
Well, like many counties, we don't have a lot of volunteers. We're right in the middle of the 36 counties, and we don't have a lot of bandwidth to do things. It actually takes a lot of work to staff a fair booth. Usually there's requirements like someone has to be there during all the days of the fair, staffing the booth. In this day and age, the only time there's any traffic is on the weekends. And so if the fair runs for 7 days, you have someone sitting there Monday through Friday with no traffic, and then, some action on Saturday and Sunday. But it's really hard to get people to go staff a booth when there's nobody there. So no, we're not having one. That's the long answer.
Yeah, that's too bad. Somebody's got one. There was some email chain going around for the progressives. Someone at some fair. Anyway, I that was a long debated. Did that actually get covered in a meeting, and how was it resolved using parliamentary procedure?
No, someone has to take leadership. That's the biggest thing we are missing in so many things that we do. Everyone is a great armchair quarterback, but when it comes to taking responsibility to get something done, there's not a lot of people stepping up and doing that. So no one did, and so no one's moving forward. And I myself do not have the bandwidth to do a county fair booth, so I had my task deflector shield up on that one.
and we're talking Clatsop County Democratic Party. Is that
yes?
Okay. Just everybody, it was a live, real example. Just so you know, that's what we're working with there. And there's things like that go on in Lynn County, Benton County, and these are just 3 little counties in one little state. There's a lot of democracy that needs our help.
Can you imagine Texas, which has 100 counties?
Oh my God. And I'm
just
sure,
mind-boggling.
You imagine the rules they follow in Texas? Yeah, who knows?
Be the law of the gun, I think. Except Austin.
Oh yeah, well, right, the bubble, supposedly. This was great, Larry. Thank you. There are no questions. We have 9 people here with us. 10 now. Thank you all 10 joining us. Hey, Expanding Electrons. Nice to have you here. And that is a climate change, yes, but we're not talking climate change. Robert's rules, which could not affect climate change no matter how much we want them to. There's nothing we can do there. But we can affect democracy with it. So.
It does limit the amount of gas expelled by members sometimes. So.
That is very true. That is very
true.
We
could probably lower the world's temperature if we would invoke limits on debate more.
It's amazing the amount of time that our government wastes by not following the rules. That is for sure. Thank you, Larry. I think we're done. What's upcoming? Do you want to tell everybody what's coming up?
I do not know specifically what we're talking about, but it's another subset of the motions. So that will be next. Well, actually, will not be next Sunday. It'll be the following Sunday, because next Sunday we're all at the State Central Committee in Eugene, taking these tools and putting them into action.
Yes. Iowa has 99 counties? Really? It seems like a lot. Jeez. Wow. So yeah, next weekend is we're going to do a broadcast after that talking about the fireworks. Is that going to be on the PDPO show, or are we going to do something special?
Let's talk about that. Let's do what makes most sense.
Sounds good. So what is today? Sunday. Join us Wednesday then for a Oregon 2020 planning meeting. And we're going to have all sorts of stuff to look at, all sorts of fun data. We're mapping the money. We've got our coders working on it right now, and I don't know what we'll have to show of that effort on Wednesday, but it'll definitely be, we will definitely have some more information. We're seeing the pattern of how it only takes a few Democrats in each state, or if it's a state level piece of legislation in each House or Senate, if it's a national piece of legislation, a few Democrats in each state. But you see how they throw a vote for corporate interest, and you can tie that money directly to the industry, the sector, and the business that had interest in that vote being thrown. And you can see it across the board. And we're mapping that out, and we're going to present it to the public, show everybody visually how votes are affected by money directly. And so join us on Wednesday. This is talking about planning for Oregon 2020 and identifying the Democrats that are just not really Democrats. Republicans, we know we got to get rid of them. But this is looking at Dems that are throwing the votes that keep passing Republican legislation or preventing progressive Democratic legislation from moving forward in our own state level. So join us for that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Dave says, thanks for presenting this. I know it's not a sexy topic, but it's important. No, it's not. And I'm surprised it's not censored yet. Everything else is getting censored. That would be in relation to the people's interest. I used to have a large selection of music that I could play, and now it's just completely gone. And I was really frustrated earlier today. We always go out with a song on this channel, and I couldn't find one. I spent so long, I was like, you got to be kidding me. All of the songs that I used to play are now blocked due to corporate interests. It's not the musicians. The musicians don't own this content anymore. This is the corporate entities that don't want us using this content for any reason. So I don't have an end song today. What I would like to ask of you is that you either get involved with your local parties so that we can help change the rules, or hit me up on Twitter at Bernie2016TV and send me links to independent music media that we could potentially use. If you know any local artists, acts that would like their music to get out and it's relevant to the revolution in any way, send us links. I'd like to start playing their material because I can't play just about anything anymore that you guys would recognize on even mainstream alternative media. That's just not, it's not allowed. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Larry, for all you're teaching us. And see you guys soon. Bye.